All right, so I think I solved my hyperactive, what would you call it? Hyperactive, avatar problem. So hopefully, as this video we're reacting to progresses, I don't have to actively hit the mute button on Discord in order to stop my avatar from bouncing into an active and deactive state randomly throughout the entire damn video. So I wanted to react to this. The Iran war prevented World War III twice, which is essentially going to argue for Nux Taku and Asmongold's position from a a more pragmatic perspective, right? I have held that, again, a lot of people really aren't paying attention to the conflict in this particular situation. They want to pretend like it's something it's not. They want to pretend like it's Afghanistan or Iraq 2.0 when it's like, no, what happened in Iraq and Afghanistan are actually quite different than what's happening right now with Iran. And the only way that you could really think that this is the case is if you don't know anything about the sandbox countries, right? And as someone who actually does know a little bit about the sandbox countries, I've already made a 5-hour video, which if I remember to do so, I will link in the video description. I've already made a 5-hour commentary on why, again, everyone is kind of wrong about the Iran situation, why this is actually objectively different than the other two wars. So we're going to react to Readiness Nation. Let's see what he has to say. Do we have... Okay, it looks like that's auto-generated. Anyway.
People across the political spectrum are losing their minds over this Iran thing. But the truth is, America's attack on Iran prevented World War III not once, but twice.
I do think that this is actually probably true. This has nothing to do with whether or not this is like a just war in question. And I think that this guy kind of mogs the podcast of the Lotus Eaters on the whole Iran situation, to be perfectly honest, as we'll get through it. But the whole thing with Venezuela and the whole thing with Iran it wasn't just about Iran and Venezuela. It was also about China and China's interest in Taiwan, right? Because Taiwan is producing the semiconductors, the vast majority of semiconductors around the world. And this is not the only, I'm not the only person who's noticed this. I mentioned this in, again, the 5-hour Iran war video that I had. And, people forget that, like, China has global civilizational aspirations, right? They don't just want to be the global superpower. They want to be the global superpower that can then control the eschatological destiny of the rest of the world, right? Because they are still communists, even though they look like they may allow capitalism, right? All Deng Xiaoping did, if you actually pay attention, is Deng Xiaoping, when asked why let markets into China, said, doesn't matter if the cat is black or white so long as it catches mice. That is to say, it doesn't really matter whether we allow markets or just pure command economy, as long as it forwards the dialectic, which is the goal, which is the historical process of communism, then, it still functions for the purpose of communism. So Deng Xiaoping figured out how to subordinate the market to the communist agenda, just as Gramsci figured out how to subordinate capitalist, modes of cultural production to communism, and just as, again, how the managerial class figured out how to subordinate the corporate structure, managerialism, to the Marxist agenda. Because Marxism is extremely invasive and extremely subversive, right? It does not just do well enough alone. It will enter into any system that it can to subvert it to its ends. And the Chinese government, just because it looks like it allows a little bit of, free markets, which it doesn't, by the way, but just because it looks like it allows a little bit of market economy, only in specific regions, by the way, that's not all across China, that's only in designated areas, doesn't necessarily mean that they are full Hoppian or like that they're full Adam Smith. No, they're not. They are absolutely antithetical to the kind of market economy Adam Smith was talking about. That's neither here nor there. So this is a civilizational project because, again, the Chinese Communist Party still does believe in the whole civilizational project of Marxism. They just figured out that orthodox Marxism does not work to achieve that goal. So I think he talks about this a little bit in the video, but I'm not entirely sure.
Once in the way that most people are tracking.
But yeah, so long story short, the Venezuela thing and the Iran thing, sorry, those were directly related to the preventing a war with China when China, because whether or not you want us to defend Taiwan is apart from the fact that if Taiwan was invaded, which China has said that they want to do, if Taiwan was invaded, the United States was going to back up Taiwan, with troops. So whether you like it or not, that's what was going to happen. And again, losing Venezuela and Iran, which means they lost a huge amount of their oil imports, right? Among other things, their ability to project chaos, to just, to divide American power across the world. This has set them back greatly. So again, whether or not you think we should be doing this, different story. Don't really care for that conversation. I'm here with the practical reality of, did this stop World War III? I suspect yes.
But also in a second way that almost no one is talking about. So let's get after it. I'm James Merritt, Emergency Manager and Career Soldier, and this is Readiness Nation. So this one's going to be a bit long and convoluted, but bear with me because I promise this story begins with us having been on the trajectory for World War III, and it ends with us having official word that we're no longer on that trajectory. But
it could still happen in the future, but at the same time, this definitely put a pause in China's plans to invade Taiwan, which was the goal, which was the whole thing. The whole thing was, if Iran started a war with Israel that, really popped off, right? Then that would divide America's attention between, again, Taiwan and Israel. And the idea was, again, divide American attention across the hemispheres through Venezuelan narco-terrorism. It was, again, all meant to divide American attention. Now, hopefully speaking, when the people actually get control over the Iranian government, some more sane people will take over, because everyone, even a large contingent of Muslims in Iran, are actually just genuinely sick of Sharia law, and Islam has been on an extremely sharp decline in Iran because of the internet, largely. But that's neither here nor there, right?
If you're new here, I'm a 21-year veteran in the U.S. Army. Having started out as an enlisted combat medic, I then commissioned as an infantry officer, and now I'm a civil affairs officer. So I'm trained and experienced in both analyzing, planning, and leading the actual fighting, as well as analyzing and leveraging everything else around the fighting. So
I think we've laid out the credentials here.
First things first, there's been a lot of nonsensical prattling online about this attack on Iran, in fact, being World War III, because the Iranians are receiving support from Russia and China.
Proxy wars do not a world war make.
Of course, it's just doom scroll clickbait trash, because it takes multiple major combatants coming in and actually fighting on both sides for it to be a world war. Great powers fighting proxy wars has never been considered a world war. No one considers the Cold War to be World War III, even though that was just a multi-decade series of great power proxy wars. No one considers the Korean War to be World War III, even though it included direct fighting between the US and China. No one considers Vietnam World War III, even though the Soviets and the Chinese were propping up the NVA and the Viet Cong. No one considers the fact that we sponsored the Mujahideen to kick the Soviets out of Afghanistan in the 80s World War III. No one considers GWAT World War III, even though we were conducting military operations in a dozen countries, several of which were directly or indirectly supported by China and/or Russia. And no one considers Ukraine World War III, even though we've been supporting Ukraine the whole time. So this is
also you can just consistency check this, right? Again, it's like, all right, define what is required, define what a world war is, right? And then just go through that list. It's like, okay, under that definition, right? Would any of these conflicts constitute a world war, right? And again, no, there is a very obvious difference between, again, the Cold War and World War I and World War II, right? Again, the Cold War was a series of proxy wars, which include Vietnam and Korea and other places like Katanga, but It's substantially different. That's why we don't, again, call it World War III. We obviously know that this is, not, this is not the case. But if we took that broader definition, right, of a world war, then as like of great powers across all the continents, right, then you could make a very strong argument that, again, World War I was not actually the First World War, right? You could push that back to possibly say, I don't want to say like maybe the French Revolutionary War, considering, again, all the powers that were actually involved in that. You have the Napoleonic Wars. What else is there? I want to say the 30 Years' War, but the 30 Years' War involved powers in Africa, both the Americas and Asia. So like that, and Europe. So again, like what exactly do we consider based on the definition? So like, unless we want to be like, oh yeah, World War I wasn't even World War One. It was actually World War, I guess, pick your number depending on how you're defining your terms, right? Yeah, I don't really think that we can really consider this to be World War III. Again, because like this is that thing with like obfuscation through equivocation, right? Like at this point we're obscuring the term by equivocating things that are as the same that are actually totally unrelated or that are different in substance. And that's what I think is going on when people are hyping this up to be like World War III. It's like, nah, again, it's like it's like equivocating the Cold War or the War on Terror as like World War III. It's really not. Like there's no substantial similarity between World War I and II and either of those two conflicts. Similarly, there's not really any substantial similarity between World War I or II and the current conflict we're in. They are just substantially different beasts, right? And I think you'd have to be highly disingenuous to say that no, they are the same in like, again, substance regarding whether or not they're world wars. I think that's like a degree of clownishness that we could just dismiss out of hand.
Not World War III. Like I said, it takes multiple major combatants actually fighting on both sides to be a world war. Or it's long been theoretically held that a nuclear exchange would constitute a world war as well.
Okay, so that actually doesn't give like a caveat, because that actually still satisfies the first premise, right? Because the whole doctrine of MAD actually satisfies that first premise. Is like if one side pops off with a nuke, all other sides pop off with a nuke, right? So then now we just objectively have all great powers that are nuclear armed in direct confrontation with each other because of mutually assured destruction. So even the case of like a nuclear armed conflict, that still satisfies the criteria of the first definition given.
As it turns out, U.S. military action over the last year has prevented World War III in both of these forms. But we'll start with the nuclear threat because that's the direct issue being addressed with both U.S. attacks on Iran. The very first thing we need to talk about is that Iran is not Iraq. The evidence of Iranian nuclear proliferation activities was gathered and promulgated by international regulatory agencies and counterproliferation watchdog groups. This is not the CIA really scrounging the bottom of the intelligence barrel to come up with, Iraq tried to procure yellow-caked uranium from Niger and is in possession of aluminum tubes that could be used in the construction of ballistic missile hulls. With Iran, the International Atomic Energy Agency released a report on 11 June 2025 outlining that Iran was in possession of 408.6 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60% purity.
Okay, I'm going to pause here because, as you know, anyone who's watched my thing, I actually like to read the things on screen that are presented. So let's go back here. So, declassified. Office of the Vice President, Washington, June 9th, 2003. Memorandum for the Vice President. From John Hanna, Acting Principal Deputy Assistant. Subject information. CIA paper on purported Iraq-Niger uranium deal. Attached, please find a CIA paper on the Iraq-Niger deal that was sent to us today. It is dated April 3rd, 2003. The paper was drafted as part of a congressional notification. We have also attached a New Yorker article by Cy Hirsch on the issue, which we are reviewing. Some of the highlights from the CIA paper include the following. On February 14th, 2002, CIA wrote that information on the alleged uranium contract between Iraq and Niger come exclusively from a foreign government. Service report that lacks crucial details, and we are working to clarify the information and to determine whether it can be corroborated. So again, as he was pointing out, this wasn't even substantiated. According to the CIA paper, the first real indication that the CIA had serious concerns about the stream of reporting on Iraq-Niger does not occur until September 2002. According to the CIA paper, in the run-up to the September 24th publication of the British White Paper, CIA had expressed concerns about the credibility of the reporting to the British. Redacted. The paper claims that redacted, and then that's all we got there.
Iraq tried to procure yellow cake uranium from Niger and is in possession of a...
So then they had tubes of mass destruction. So this is by Simone Henderson, September 23rd, 2002. Let's figure out who this person is first. Simone Henderson is the Baker Senior Fellow and Director of the Bernstein Program on Gulf and Energy Policy at the Washington Institute, specializing in energy matters and the conservative Arab states of the Persian Gulf. So the article reads, as the advance towards war against Iraq continues, the Bush administration has started lobbying missiles at hardline liberals, ever unconvinced about the threat of Saddam Hussein posed to his region and the world. The administration's game, presumably, is to make these diehards change their minds and to win over skeptical members of the public. One of the latest missiles involves aluminum tubes, but the story here is complicated and thus might confuse rather than clarify the danger of Saddam. On September 8th, the New York Times reported in at least 14 months, Iraq sought to buy thousands of specially designed aluminum tubes, which American officials believe were intended as components to enrich uranium. American officials said several efforts to arrange the shipment of aluminum tubes were blocked or intercepted, but declined to say, citing the sensitivity of intelligence where they came from or how they were stopped. Having leaked the story, the administration ran with it as September 8th was Sunday, and the Vice President Cheney, speaking on NBC's Meet the Press, referred to the aluminum tubes. What we have seen recently is that Saddam Hussein is trying through his illicit procurement networks to acquire equipment he needs to be able to enrich uranium.
Aluminum tubes that could be used in the construction of ballistic missile hulls. With Iran,
Now here we got the IAEA. Not exactly a shill for the CIA. Let's be totally clear. This is right here an agent of global homo, right? Not necessarily the CIA. There are different powers at work. You know, the CIA, Mossad, the KGB from the Soviets, the modern equivalent, I guess. MI5. All have different motivations. They work together because they can have shared goals, but they all have different goals, right? There's no one grand conspiracy. There's a bunch of vying conspiracies that at times have vested shared interests. So anyway, let's continue. Let's see, Board of Governors. This is from 31st of May, 2025. For official use only, item 6 of the provisional agenda, verification and monitoring in the Islamic Republic of Iran in light of the United Nations Security Council Resolution 2231, which was in 2015. Report by the Director General. Introduction. In this report of the Director General to the Board of Governors and in parallel to the United Nations Security Council is on the Islamic Republic of Iran's implementation of its nuclear-related commitments under the Joint Cohesive Plan of Action, JCPOA, and on matters, well, I don't get any more than that. It would have been great if we could see more, but okay.
The International Atomic Energy Agency released a report on 11 June 2025 outlining that Iran was in possession of 408.6 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60% purity, 274.5 kilograms enriched to 20%, and almost 8 metric tons enriched to no more than 5% purity. The following day, the IAEA issued an updated confidential assessment to their member states, raising their assessment of 60% enriched uranium to 440.9 kilograms. As reported by the Associated Press and Reuters. Now, these...
Okay, so we don't really have much to read here, but the citations are Iran increased stockpile of nuclear weapons grade uranium before Israeli attack, UN agency says. And let's speed through this. Much of Iran's nuclear bomb grade uranium likely to be in hold on. Isfahan. I think that's how you say it. IAEA's Grossi says. Says right here, satellite image shows a closer view of the destroyed tunnel entrances at Isfahan missile complex after reported airstrikes amid the U.S.-Israeli conflict with Iran. In Isfahan province, Iran, March 8th, 2026. Let's see. Yeah, this is apparently via Reuters.
Uranium to 440.9 kilograms, as reported by the Associated Press and Reuters. Now, these percentages may sound random, so let's talk about what they actually mean. Fuel rods for nuclear power plants are enriched to between 3 and 5% purity. Various forms of nuclear research require uranium enriched to 20%. But there is no peaceful purpose for uranium enriched past 20% purity. Nuclear nonproliferation groups consider 20% to be a critical threshold limit that if any nation crosses, it's a significant indicator that that nation is pursuing nuclear weapons.
Yeah, so it's not just any kind of uranium. You can also like use uranium that is like not enriched for other purposes, right? For example, the M1 Abrams tank uses a composite uranium mesh, if I remember correctly, which is one of the things that would make a neutron bomb actually, which is not a type of nuke, it's a type of radiological warfare tool. Devastatingly dangerous, right? Because if you bombard depleted uranium with neutrons, you can replete uranium. So that's actually one of the many things that can make a neutron bomb actually really, really bad news if anyone has their hands on it. Yeah. And if anyone can think of a genuinely peaceful way it means outside of the 20% enrichment rate, I'm all ears, right? Oh, excuse me. Yeah, from what I understand, these are levels that aren't necessarily needed for use in like an actual genuine civilian nuclear program. The only use that I'm aware of this being the case, and I could be wrong, so correct me if I am wrong, is again for the development of nuclear weapons.
Iran possessing significant quantities of 60% pure uranium is a significant nuclear proliferation indicator and risk. Nuclear weapons require uranium that's 90% pure, so Iran's 440 kilograms of 60% uranium enriches down to 293 kilograms of 90% uranium. This enrichment process can take as little as 10 days per 50 kilograms of 90% uranium produced. So previous to any US military action, Iran could have enriched their entire assessed stockpile of 60% uranium in as little as 2 months. But what does that mean in terms of their ability to produce nuclear weapons? Simple nuclear weapons take anywhere from 25 to 50 kilograms per weapon, depending on the type and the yield of the weapon, while the most sophisticated and thus most powerful weapons only require 15 kilograms. So to make the most crude first-generation nuclear weapons requires 25 kilograms of 90% uranium and has a yield of 15 kilotons, which is the equivalent blast energy of 15,000 tons of TNT, based on...
If you didn't know what a kiloton is, right?
On the IAEA's report, Iran would have enough fissile material to make 11 of these weapons. And as for the time it would take for Iran to go from having 90% uranium to having a functional nuclear weapon, or what's called the breakout time, could take as little as 2 months, depending on how much of the preparatory research Iran has completed. So before the US acted, Iran may have been as close as 2 to 4 months away from having almost a dozen nuclear weapons. That's not great, but is it really America's problem?
Yeah, it is. Again, if you watch my 5-hour video on the topic, I talk about Twelverism in there because that is the guiding ideology, specifically Khomeinism, right? But Khomeinism is a branch of Twelverism. And Twelverism has this neat little thing called apocalypticism baked into it, right? This idea that just like the dispensationalist believes that by maximalizing chaos in the Middle East, he can, force Jesus Christ to come back into time in his second coming. Or just like some Chabadnik, like extremists believe that, hey, if we maximize chaos for the state of Israel, we can force the Mashiach to appear. The whole when there is a great war kind of deal in the land. And yeah, Twelverism is the exact same beast except for Islam. They are waiting for the return of the hidden Imam, the Mahdi, and the thing about that is the Mahdi is not supposed to appear until, again, a time of great chaos towards the end of history. And so if you hate this world and then you want to like bring about the coming of the next world, and you believe that you can do that by maximizing chaos, well, guess what you're incentivized to do, right? Because it turns out you hate this world, and you believe there's continuity between your now and there. So then, maybe dying for the sake of Allah is not actually that disincentivized, right? I'm just saying there's still a cost benefit analysis going through the heads of mujahideen, right? What are their it tells you a lot about their value structure. What is it that they value? Well, it turns out they don't value life, they love death. And even fucking Muhammad says it in the in the hadith. Muhammad is very clear that the mujahideen loves death more than he loves life, because he in death finds his reward in new life. So it's not, the incentive structure of the Twelver is very different than the incentive structure of the secular American or the secular European or the Christian American or the Christian European. A very different incentive structure because they believe fundamentally different things about reality. They value fundamentally different things. So their calculus is going to be fundamentally different. They don't care how many people have to die, because if you think about it this way, if you have an infinite good versus a finite good, you're going to give up, and you have the opportunity to get one over the other. You're going to pick the infinite good over the finite good. So it doesn't matter how many people have to die. They're going to make that calculus. They're going to see the calculus. They're going to be like, it is still worth it no matter how many of us have to die and how much we have to suffer, because the good will outweigh any of the bad that we actually experience. Now, you got to remember, again, the Iranian government is not the same as the Iranian people. The Iranian government is hardline Khomeiniist, which means they're hardline Twelvers. The the actual folks on the ground, the people themselves, not so much, right? Again, Iran has been going through a massive secret apostasy because, again, you say that you're not a Muslim anymore and, you were previously considered a Muslim, you die, right? They fucking kill you. This is a country that, again, would hang bodies, in publicly so that people could actually see it and know that, again, if you cross the state or what the state values, then they'll just straight up kill you, right? These are people that, again, would find out that someone they shot, because they were at a protest, was in a hospital. They go into the hospital and then threaten to kill the doctors if they didn't let them see you, and then whether they had to kill the doctor or not, come see the patient and then shoot him in the while they're receiving care, that way to ensure that they're dead. These are not good people. These are not people that you can negotiate with, because they hate the world. Right? They want to see their speculative metaphysic come true, and they don't care how many people have to die for them to see it. So, just in case you don't know what kind of people we're talking about, we're not talking about your average, Joe, westernized, peaceful Muslim. We're talking about, again, some really bad actors when we're talking about, again, the Iranian regime.
So this is where we need to talk about the other major consideration for nuclear threats, which is the delivery system. You may have heard the term nuclear triad, which refers to a nation possessing ground-based nuclear intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs, submarine-based nuclear ballistic missiles, and nuclear bombs that can be dropped from aircraft. Only the US, Russia, China, India, and Pakistan have full nuclear triads, while the UK and France have nuclear dyads consisting of sea and air-based capabilities. And North Korea only has ground-based capabilities.
I mean, well, to be fair, North Korea has basically no money, right? You actually kind of need money in order to, have any of these. And North Korea has basically no money, so yeah, they can't really even feed their soldiers correctly. So it's not exactly surprising that they only have one of these.
Compared to building a stealth bomber that can make it past US air defenses, ground-based capabilities are far easier to develop. And just like North Korea, ground-based ballistic missiles would be Iran's first stop as well.
This part seems like it should be common sense to anyone who actually stops to think about any of the logistics of this for like even 5 minutes, right? But it's the kind of thing that it's like you might that you do find yourself having to explain to people.
So we need to take a look at where Iran's ballistic missile capabilities currently stands. For almost a decade now, Iran has claimed they were self-imposing limits on the range of their ballistic missiles to 2,000 kilometers so that they wouldn't be viewed as a threat. However, even if they were honest about this limitation, it still means that they could strike 14 NATO allies. But they were lying.
So, when talking about the 14 NATO allies, let's see who they have highlighted here. Poland, Germany, Slovakia, Slovenia, Italy. Let's see. I'm pretty sure the Czech Republic is in there. No, wait, the Czech Republic is not in that list. My bad. Turkey is one of the ones listed there. Greece is listed there. Macedonia is listed in there. Yeah. So, again. Yeah, again, even if they're telling the truth, all of these areas right here would be targets.
Honest about this limitation, it still means that they could strike 14 NATO allies. But they were lying about these self-imposed limits.
Like, why the fuck would they tell the truth, right? Like, has anyone ever read The Art of War? The Art of War, first, one of the first fucking teachings is all wars, or one of the most important first principles is all wars deception, right? So, Europe on alert over Iran's missile range. There are growing concerns that Iran could strike targets further afield than previously thought following its attempted attack on the UK-US military base on Diego Garcia, nearly 4,000 kilometers away. So Diego Garcia is down here, and it's really our only base in the Indian Ocean. Let's see. Notes, measurements are geodesic. Oh, I mean, that's common sense. So this is a Koram Shahar. You can read it right there. I don't speak Farsi, right? Anyway. Missile potentially used in Diego Garcia strike, length 13 meters. Let's see. You can see London is within strike range. Before start of Iran war, Tehran's maximum missile range was believed to be 2,000 kilometers. After attempt on Diego Garcia, Israel claims Iran's missiles can travel twice as far, potentially threatening much of Europe. Well, that's almost all of Europe, except for very specific spots in the United Kingdom, Ireland, Spain, and then Portugal gets completely off the hook for some reason. I guess Iceland gets spared any issue. March 20th, 2 missiles fired, 1 fails mid-flight, others reportedly shot down by U.S. warship.
And on 20 March 2026, Iran launched 2 ballistic missiles at Diego Garcia Air Base, 4,000 kilometers from their border. This is significant for 3 reasons. The first reason is that 29 of 32 NATO countries are in range of Iran's current ballistic missile capabilities, which means that the U.S. not engaged in any military interventions in as little as 2 to 4 months from now, Iran could have had the capability to strike 11 of the largest cities in NATO with nuclear weapons.
And to be fair, they don't even necessarily have to actually fire the gun. They just have to actually have it there so that, again, it can be used as a threat. That's the thing people don't really obviously these people in question again, they have a different value system than we do, and it wouldn't surprise me if some of these people actually wanted to go to a full-blown nuclear war, especially with the Great Satan and the Little Satan. But even if they didn't, that's still a massive coercive pressure point, because again, these people, they love death more than they love life, and they believe that on the other side is far greater, goods than anything that will ever be experienced here, to the point where life here is actually a detriment. And that, again, the only way to ensure, because Allah is the greatest of deceivers, his makr is, or deception, is unparalleled. The only way to be sure, even as the rightly guided caliph said, if you had 1 foot in paradise, the only insurance you would have against the makr of Allah would be martyrdom. Right? Again, there's a twisted incentive structure that people don't talk about in this for some reason.
If the warheads were the low-efficiency 15 kilotons that we previously discussed, that would result in 1.22 million deaths, 2.49 million injuries, and property damage exceeding $1.1 trillion. However, the theoretical yield limit on these first-generation bombs is 400 kilotons. So if they refined their weapons up to this limit before attacking, the devastation would amount to 4.87 million deaths, 11.76 million injuries, and total property damage would exceed $5.2 trillion. Now that said, I would be remiss if I didn't point out to British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, who said this isn't the UK's war and they won't be pulled into it, that without this war, a single 15 kiloton blast in the heart of London would cause 180,000 dead and 350,000 wounded British.
Yeah, the thing is, Starmer doesn't really care about his country. He really doesn't. He cares about his own ideological project. And he doesn't have to care about his country in this particular issue, because it turns out he can just rely on the United States to bail him and his country out of danger in this case, right? It's just, objectively speaking, exactly what happened, right? The European Union doesn't really have to take the issue of Iran seriously, because geopolitically speaking, whether we like it or not, whether you want to be an interventionist or an isolationist, this was going to become your problem eventually, right? This was not exactly an avoidable situation. Anyone who was paying attention saw the writing on the walls here. You could disagree with every other conflict that we've been in. This one was not avoidable. But anyway.
And they have the missiles to strike London right now. And had the U.S. not engaged in any military actions, in as little as 2 to 4 months, they could have had the nuclear warhead. So this absolutely is your war, even more so than it is ours. But to that end, it's also critical to point out that there are...
Yeah, but you may forget that, like, again, Europe is currently being overrun by suicidal empathy, right? the European governments love their illegal migrants who commit rape and murder within their borders, and destabilize their society to ferment revolutionary fervor more than they do their actual citizenry. It's again, sick and twisted, ideological incentives that the governments of Europe actually have.
Assessments testified to by the Strategic Command commander before Congress that assert that had we not intervened, Iran could have had intercontinental ballistic missiles capable of striking the U.S. by the end of the year.
I don't know necessarily about the timeline. I'm not an engineer with this relative knowledge, but again, we also have to remember that some of the technology relevant was also being supplied by by China. Right, China was supplying them, not necessarily with the technology per se, but was supplying them with, Chinese technology in this form of, like, again, missiles for their, rocket, force. But anyway.
So repeating that analysis, looking at the 11 most populous cities on the East Coast as targets, with 15 kiloton weapons, we're looking at just over 1 million dead, just over 2 million injured, and more than $1 trillion in property damage. With 400 kiloton warheads, we're looking at 4.7 million dead, 8.2 million injured, and $6.75 trillion in property damage.
Now, as much as I dislike New York, I don't necessarily want to see 1.5 million New Yorkers just, burned like Hiroshima, right? Don't necessarily want to see that, but.
So these are the potential consequences of an action. This isn't my opinion. This is the cold, hard math. Now.
And this is the thing, again, people keep, forgetting, is that, again, what are the consequences of being wrong? Because this is something we should always ask ourselves whenever we're doing any kind of, pragmatic evaluation of a situation, right? This isn't even consequentialist reasoning, right? This is a reality-based fact check, right? Because obviously, especially from a virtue ethics or a rational egoist perspective, you still have to ask the question of first of all, how did we even get here in this situation, right? And again, what is the effect on the content of my character that action or inaction and what kinds of action will produce, right? And yeah, the consequences of inaction in this case are, if you let Mujahideen get nuclear weapons, they will almost certainly use those nuclear weapons at least as and you can see it right now with the Strait of Hormuz, right, where they are violating the law in the way that they're committing this blockade and attacking civilian ships, right? The Iran is very clearly breaking international law, right? And they're doing so in a way to try to bolster themselves up, right? Because again, Islam is a religion of machismo, right? If you can humiliate Islam, it doesn't look very good from the perspective of the religion, because Islam does not predict decline, it predicts perpetual incline. To forever ever reach higher and higher and higher till you conquer the world, right? So the idea that, again, the non-Muslim has had power over the Muslim, and that the civilizational project of Islam has just objectively failed to perform its function of conquering the world, right? Of defeating the Dar al-Harb, that's what it was, the House of War. It's that's been part of the reason that there has been a great apostasy. So they're already doing this thing with the Strait of Hormuz, basically trying to hold the entire world hostage using the waterways here as their means of doing so. What makes you think that they wouldn't do the exact same thing if they had a nuclear warhead?
If you don't believe Iran was actually intending on developing nuclear weapons, or that they weren't going to be able to develop ICBMs anytime soon, you may or may not be correct about that. But these are the consequences for being wrong in your analysis. But with that,
yeah, again, that's kind of the point I was driving at, right? Is there are real consequences in the form of like human lives of if you're wrong in this particular conversation, right? And I don't think really people have actually stopped to think, all right, what are the actual consequences of me being wrong? And then performing a Bayesian analysis, right? An actual like analysis of like, what are the actual probabilities involved that the position, like either position A or position B is actually true. This is where I think Bayesian analysis actually comes right into play. And I think if you actually did a Bayesian analysis of this situation, I do think that you would, after a deep review of everything going on, would suggest that, yeah, the idea that these weren't going to be abused by the Iranian regime is just kind of laughable, to be perfectly honest.
Said, let's look at those dissenting arguments. The first thing we need to talk about is the fatwa, or Islamic religious edict, against Iran developing nuclear weapons that the Ayatollah issued in 2003. There are three things we need to discuss here that lead me to believe this fatwa was not sincere. The first thing everyone needs to understand is the historical context. This fatwa was issued after the disclosure of Iran's clandestine nuclear development program in 2002 and the U.S. invasion of Iraq in 2003. So
it's not like there wasn't a reason to just basically try to appease, again, the Western powers, right?
Iran had just got caught with its hand in the nuclear cookie jar and just watched a neighboring regime get kicked over on the pretense that they were developing WMDs. So this strikes me more as them saying anything that they needed to save their own skins, as opposed to them sincerely seeing the error of their ways. Furthermore, it's incredibly important to point out to anyone who thinks they wouldn't lie about a religious edict that the Surah Ali Imran 328 of the Quran is interpreted widely as meaning it's all right to lie to infidels in self-defense.
Yeah, the thing is there's actually two different kinds of lies. There's a kitman and the taqiyya. The taqiyya is a straight up, and this isn't just in the Quran, this is also in the Hadith. The Hadith also says this, right? Because the Quran actually does not make any sense if you just read it in isolation, because first of all, it's written by chapter length, or organized by chapter length, not by chronology. Second of all, the Quran also teaches Allah can abrogate or change his commandments, which he does within the time span of the Quran being quote-unquote revealed. And it also says Muhammad is the perfect pattern of conduct for Muslims to emulate. And it turns out the Quran does not tell you which chapters go where, chronologically speaking, so the abrogation order makes the Quran impossible to read unless you already know the timeline. And again, the edict that Muhammad's behavior is the perfect pattern of conduct to be emulated makes no sense either if you're only reading the Quran, because the Quran doesn't tell you how Muhammad behaved. So you have to go to the Hadith for that information. And yes, the whole thing is also reinforced in the Hadith, where you can either tell a full-out lie, such as which is taqiyya, or you can tell a half-truth, kitman, right? And again, there's already a basis for Allah changing his mind or concealing information from the infidel. So yeah, this idea of this fatwa being a piece of dawaganda to trick the kafir, I actually think that that's fairly reasonable. It sounds like something that a 12-verse jurisprudential expert could actually justify.
and interpreted by more radical sects as meaning it's always all right to lie to infidels.
When he says more radical sects, he means the correct sects in terms of like Islam. Again, read the hadith and then tell me that these people that are the more extreme ones aren't actually the ones living out the Islamic faith. They absolutely are. And if you think that that's not the case, I don't believe you actually read any of these texts. I just straight up don't. I'm calling bullshit on you. Either that or you're lying to my face, which propagandists will do.
Furthermore, the Hadith, the traditions of the Prophet, assert that it's morally permissible to be deceptive in war. So there's actually an Islamic scriptural basis for it to be morally acceptable to issue a false fatwa to deceive an infidel military adversary to preserve the Islamic Republic. Finally, Iran has a long history.
I mean, yeah, because again, like the supreme god, like the high god, the source god, the Motokami is what the Japanese would call it, right? Is the source of aesthetic and moral principle, right? So in the case of like Christianity and Judaism, God is truth, right? So there's an intrinsic, you're supposed to be honest when at all possible, right? Not to the point of self-destruction. Virtue ethics does allow, for example, the concealing of information that someone is not entitled to, because it turns out you're not always entitled to information. So when you're not entitled to information, it is not a lie to omit information. And there is that, right? But in general, the virtue in Christianity and Judaism is honesty. It's truth, right? Because God is truth. Well, in Islam, God is associated with makr. He is the greatest of deceivers. The root word being makr for deceiver. And deceit means like a cunning deception, a pre-planned deception, right? Something done with intent to destroy. So yeah. When you're when your Motokami, your source for all reality, is the principle of deception, then it makes sense that again they would be able to justify lying in these contexts.
Of lying and negotiating in bad faith. Most recently, with the revelation that they have ballistic missiles with twice the range of their claimed self-limitation.
And yeah, again, it's like, well, we don't believe that they wouldn't use it. Well, we already found out that they were lying. Right? Again, the very existence of this weapon proves that they weren't telling the truth in the first place. Right? I'm not a big interventionist myself, but it's like even I can see like, yeah, this was not an avoidable conflict. The writing was on the wall to anyone who was actually paying attention.
This is also important for three reasons. First, it demonstrates a strategy of not just concealing their true military capabilities, which is common the world over, but rather actively making up stories to try to lull the world into a false sense of security that Iran is not a threat to them, while secretly moving to become a threat to them.
Yeah, and to be fair, people eat this shit up.
Second, military capabilities that are kept secret have no deterrence value. If you want to dissuade other countries from messing with you, they need to have a clear understanding of what the consequences of messing with you are. And the primary purpose for intermediate range missiles you can launch from your country into another country in the region, is deterrence. So the only reason for a country to keep their intermediate ballistic missiles secret is if they're part of some grander machination. A grander machination they don't want to reveal yet. A machination like they're intended to be the delivery vehicle for the nuclear weapons they're working on.
I think that this is actually really easy logic to follow, and I generally agree with basically everything you said here, right? Again, it's like the entire purpose of having these arms in the first place and letting people know that you have these arms is deterrence, right? That's the whole purpose of having a nuclear program in the first place, right? Or for most countries like that don't want to use nuclear weapons. The whole purpose of having a nuclear arsenal is that they don't have to use it at all anyway, right? You can't really invade a nuclear armed state because they always have the ability to, again, fire off the nukes and then bring the whole world down with them, right? So then the question then becomes again, obviously, well, if the only function for having these weapons is either use or deterrence, and then you're not actually using these weapons as deterrence because no one even knows you have them, they don't function as deterrence, so what is the other option? I mean, it seems pretty self-explanatory to me.
Third, this proves the primary criticism of the 2015 Iran nuclear deal, the JCPOA, correct. Critics at the time pointed out that the JCPOA did nothing to limit Iran's ballistic missile research or acquisition. The concern here being that Iran could just pause their nuclear program and work on delivery systems for the 10 years until the main provisions of the JCPOA expired, then return to their nuclear program with ICBMs already in hand, having not violated any treaties or sanctions while doing so. This concern was proven correct with Iran's attack on Diego Garcia. But the intel community says they don't have an ICBM program. Some of you are yelling at your screen right now. And yes, this is the intel community's assessment. However, this is the same intel community that had no idea that Iran had 4,000-kilometer intermediate ballistic missiles. So what else about Iran's missile program might they be missing?
It is kind of funny, right? It's like, oh yeah, you can't trust the CIA, which, by the way, he didn't use the CIA to like make his point, right? He used the UN, which is not exactly trying to justify war between America and Iran, right? But it is kind of interesting that, like, again, it's like, oh yeah, you can't trust the CIA. Oh wait, but you can trust the CIA, right? Like, we can see that exact shift right there. You can't trust them when they make a positive affirmation, but you can trust them when they make a negative affirmation. What? Excuse me? Right?
Furthermore, intermediate ballistic missiles, like the ones used in the attack on Diego Garcia, leaves the Earth's atmosphere during flight. They don't fly as high as ICBMs, but they do leave the atmosphere, which means they need a re-entry vehicle to re-enter the atmosphere without breaking apart. So we know that Iran already has the technology to solve half of the ICBM problem. The other half is a launch vehicle capable of propelling the missile significantly further into space.
Don't you love when just like the conspiracy bro is proven right just by the shit actually organically happening? We're just putting that out there. Another conspiracy for the fucking cookie jar.
ICBM's launch vehicle and the space launch vehicle for satellites or manned space missions are nearly identical. And guess what? Iran has a space launch vehicle program. But what they don't have is a manned space program. They claim they intend on manned space missions by 2029, but after the first 3 years of research, made no further advancements from 2013 to 2023.
And then you got to remember again the whole doctrine in Islam that you can lie to the kafir, that you can lie to, again, the Dar al-Harb, to obtain a military advantage. I'm just saying, again, it seems to point to a very specific direction that certain people don't want to necessarily even consider might actually be true. Because it turns out not all sandbox countries are the same. And if we admit that not all sandbox countries are the same, we might actually have to have some nuance in our conversation, right? That maybe Iraq and Afghanistan weren't necessarily, or, could be an unjustified situation, but maybe the Iran one actually was.
Returning to their program in 2023 to launch a 500-kilogram biomodule to an altitude of 130 kilometers, which could actually be for space travel, but it's also just under the altitude for the first stage of an ICBM booster rocket and exceeds the payload weight requirement for a nuclear warhead. Moreover, they've made no further progress since that launch. And whereas they do have a network of low Earth orbit satellites, they didn't launch any of those themselves. The Russians did it for them. The only satellites Iran launched for themselves are military R&D satellites. So if they don't have much of a manned space program and they aren't launching their own satellites, what other possible purpose could their space launch vehicle program have than solving the other half of the ICBM?
How funny is it that, like, again, the only satellites Iran put in space themselves are military satellites of all fucking things, right? Again, a bit on the nose.
And I don't care if you're the director of national intelligence. You don't get to make an appeal to your own authority as the intel community here. You need to actually explain why they're running a very expensive dual-use technology program that they're not getting meaningful civilian uses out of, if not for nefarious ends. Furthermore, there's evidence that they're not producing all of this themselves, that they're actually buying a lot of it from North Korea. Nuclear proliferation expert Dr. Bruce Bechtel lays out his argument for this in an article for 1945 magazine. The most significant part of his argument is that in 2020 there were technology transfers from North Korean to Iranian firms that are consistent with the critical components of the Hwasong-15 missile, which is North Korea's most advanced ICBM.
This still links it back to China, because the only reason North Korea still exists is because it's propped up by China. Just again, it all goes back. It all goes back to China, right? So anyway, let's read this. North Korean missile is new type of ICBM. North Korea appears to have succeeded in developing a missile capable of delivering a nuclear weapon anywhere in the United States, and it could be only 2 or 3 tests away from being declared combat ready. This is a Hwasong-15, two-stage liquid-fueled intercontinental ballistic missile, ICBM. Specifications estimated 22 meters in length, 2.5 meters in diameter. Mass is 40 to 50 tons. Thrust at liftoff 72 tons. First stage fuel tank, fuel and oxidizer spontaneously ignite on contact. Let's see. First stage, 2 Soviet-era RD-250 engines. Let's see. Second stage, overall size suggests it contains 50% more propellant than Hwasong-14. Second stage, most likely powered by 4 small engines derived from Soviet R-27 missile. First oxidizer tank between second and first stage. We have second stage oxidizer, and then finally we have the payload. So some experts believe Hwasong-15 can deliver 1,000 kilogram payload to any point on the U.S. mainland. Missile thought to be large and powerful enough to carry simple decoys or other countermeasures to challenge the U.S. missile defense system. New engineering mechanism, gimbaled thrust system, allows engine's exhaust nozzle to move from side to side to adjust missile course. Launch footage shows a missile launching from platform, not from mobile launcher. Transporter erector launcher TEL 9-axle modified version of Chinese lumber truck WS-51-200. So
Hwasong-15 has been tested by North Korea twice and is proven to be capable of striking the entirety of the continental U.S. These transactions were identified and flagged by the UN as proliferation activities, and sanctions were imposed by the U.S. Treasury Department. So it's a matter of public record that these transactions did in fact transpire. Link to the full article in the description.
Again, you don't exactly have to go off the CIA's word on this, right? It's again, the CIA isn't the source of these claims at this point. It is just like other organizations, like again, the International Atomic Energy Association, pointing out these problems. So to all those people who be like, oh, well, you got to trust the CIA. We don't have to refer to the CIA basically at all for any of this stuff. Most of this is public record from other organizations that actually have a vested interest in not letting this happen. And by this, I mean a conflict between the United States and Iran.
So taken all together, it's entirely possible that Iran had or was close to having ICBMs even without a dedicated ICBM program. But the 2025 National Intelligence Estimate says that Iran doesn't have a dedicated nuclear weapon program either, and that there's no evidence that they were constructing a nuclear warhead. Many of you are yelling at your screen right now. That's also true. However, as discussed, the IAEA verifies that Iran has a great deal of uranium that's been enriched well above levels that have any peaceful purpose. Also, as we discussed, to complete the enrichment process and build the warheads can take as little as 2 to 4 months. So when all of this is taken together, what a reasonable person would conclude is that Iran is doing everything that they can to get all of the subordinate technologies as close as possible to having a nuclear-tipped ICBM without hitting any tripwires or violating any treaties. This way, they can get all their ducks in a row while maintaining plausible deniability and thus not giving the international community the predicate to engage in actions against them.
It also seems to work because you have retards in the United States and in Europe who don't know anything about any of this stuff, eating this up. It's like, oh yeah, everything is going on here is like awful and terrible, and it's like, well, I can just literally watch Iranians like glaze the United States for their intervention in their country. Because of how, just pointing that out there, right? It's like, I in fact, I actually did that earlier. I was watching like a 1-hour podcast between, with some Iranians talking about this exact issue, right? So it's like, oh my God.
Then, once all their ducks are in a row, they'll make their mad dash to the bomb, as it's called. It's also worth pointing out that if they really didn't have any ambition for nuclear weapons, there was no reason to not capitulate to U.S. demands for a verifiable end to all programs and technologies that could be used for nuclear weapons or delivery systems, and made a deal to do so in exchange for a boatload of humanitarian aid.
That's another thing. It's like it's not like all of this is arbitrary. A lot of the sanctions could have been lifted by them just opening up and being transparent. And then if it turning out that they, being all of this being true in the sense of like what they're alleged to have said is like, oh yeah, we're not actually developing any of this stuff. So here we are. We're going to open it up. We're going to show it to all of y'all, right? That's all they had to do, and then actually have that be proven true by their openness, and then many of these sanctions would have not just been lifted, they would have actually gotten humanitarian aid. Like, they would have actually been assisted. Because I don't know if you know about this, but there's a lot of problems going on in Iran right now. Especially with all their military sable rattling right now, and they are hyperinflating their currency pretty bad. It's not Zimbabwe levels of bad yet. It's not Hungarian Pengo levels of bad, but it's still pretty bad.
Did try to negotiate this exact thing with them multiple times before we attacked. If they really weren't after nukes, they could have both avoided all of this and gotten a hefty aid package to boot. So a reasonable person can certainly conclude that Iran is in fact pursuing nuclear weapons. And if that is in fact their intent, the evidence, as I've presented it, indicates that had we not intervened, they would have been able to strike our NATO allies by midsummer, and us by the end of the year. So there is in fact a significant case that Iran posed an imminent nuclear threat to the US and our NATO allies, and that our intervention at a minimum significantly set back this timeline, if not averted nuclear catastrophe entirely. Now,
and again, I'm of the opinion that you actually could make a far better case of like a just war, just war conditions being made for example, use it. Oh, hold on. Use in causis, I think I remember correctly. It's been a while, and I'm a little tired. I recorded this late, but it's like the just in cause, and then use in bello, which is just in war. So it's like the conditions required for the cause of war to be just, and for the act of war to be just. And then finally, we even seem to have in this particular conflict an actual very clear plan of again, justice in end, right, for an actual win condition that we would consider being like the something that would cause immediate ceasefire, right? And we've negotiated that quite a bit, and Iran keeps moving the goalposts, but yeah, it's like this is probably one of the more just conflicts that we've had in our lifetime, to be perfectly honest. Like, unironically, this is just a very bizarre situation.
The criticism has been made that this is an awful lot of trouble if all we get out of it is more time before Iran could get nukes.
That is another thing, and that's why the IRGC has to fucking go. That's why, again, anything resembling the Khomeiniist regime and the Khameini-ish regime has to go. No more Ayatollah Supreme leaders, right? The Iranian people seem to want, Reza Pahlavi, reinstated as the Shah. Honestly, give the Iranian people what they want, right? Of course, the Iranian regime is not going to agree to this, because the Iranian regime wants to hold on to power, because they're trying to bring about the return of the Mahdi. But the final victory for Islam in the world over the Christians and the Jews, which they regard to be the worst of creatures according to the Quran. But that being said, that would probably be the quickest way to actually get a stable peace, is to with hopefully minimal casualty, because casualty just happens in warfare. That's the tragic thing about war, is even if your war is just, innocent people will die. But which is why you shouldn't want to go to war, and why a just cause of war requires you to have had many exhaustive attempts to prevent war in the first place, right? You can't just go gung-ho into war. In just war theory, you actually have to exhaust the alternatives to war before you actually go to war. This is medieval thinking, by the way, right? The medieval people understood that before you go to war, you actually have to try to not go to war for the war to be just.
Because all the previous administrations were able to buy us more time without going to war. And yes, kicking Iran's nuclear can down the road has been the policy of the last 9 administrations.
Oh wait, I think he's probably going to lead up to something.
And none of those previous administrations had to go to war to do that. But the problem with the long-term strategy of kicking the can down the road is that eventually you run out of road. And on that day, you only get more road if you plow it with bombs. So if Iran really was a 2 to 4 month mad dash from the bomb, we were most certainly out of road.
I would agree here, and I do actually agree. From what I do know about Iran and again Khomeinism and Twelverism, I do think we were actually out of road. I do think that, like, again, we were at a crossroad, and I don't think people realize how dangerous this particular crossroad actually was. Partly because we like to think that we left behind the nuclear conflict era of duck and cover, you know, when the Berlin Wall fell, and then later on the I think it was in 91. I think it might have been in 91 when, like, the Soviet Union finally collapsed, right? Someone correct me if I'm wrong in the thing. Yeah, I think I'm not entirely sure the exact date the Soviet Union actually collapsed, but yeah.
And if you have to make a mess to get more road anyway, why not dig in, do work, and try to finish this once and for all? So stymieing Iran's nuclear ambition was the first way.
And again, there's the obvious thing of, like, if this is a just war, we could also potentially help not just ourselves to not have to deal with this. We could also potentially help Iran. Again, the Iranian people seem to be pretty fucking, you know, obviously most of the Iranian people that I'm going to be watching are going to be people who are themselves refugees in other countries, right? Maybe the people on the ground don't feel the same way, but, you know, we did see when I reacted to Fafo Khameini actually, by the Apostate Prophet music. We did see various examples of, again, Iranians in Iran, you know, when they were actually protesting, having things like, again, pictures of Donald Trump, a thank you to the Prime Minister of Israel on signs. We did see them with things like, again, the the image of King Reza Pahlavi. It doesn't exactly seem that the Iranian people are all that fond of the Iranian government, right? They kind of want to return to Persia. And again, if this war ends up, you know, replacing the Iranian government with the Persian government, that's probably a better thing for the Iranian people themselves.
In which this war averted World War III, but I promised you it prevented World War III twice, and here it is. Whereas the attack on Iran had its own justification, as did the attack on Venezuela, they were both really about China. For the last
he talks about it.
10 years, China's been what we call the pacing threat for the U.S. military, meaning that all the planning and training that we do and all the weapons and equipment that we acquire are all oriented towards fighting large-scale combat operations against China. Furthermore, China's been rather vocal about its ambition to claim Taiwan by force, and this ambition was projected to come to fruition sometime next year.
Yeah, they weren't exactly subtle about it, right? Now, that would have been a hard fight because Taiwan has been planning for, you know, dealing with an invasion for quite a while. But just numbers-wise, it wasn't looking too good.
Now, if you have no idea why anyone cares about Taiwan or why we would fight a war to defend them, it's all about microchips. Taiwan produces 60% of the global supply of semiconductors and produces 90% of the world's most advanced microchips that are needed for computers, smartphones, and most notably now, AI. So if China seized Taiwan, they'd be in control of 80% of all semiconductor manufacturing and between 92 and 95% of advanced microchip manufacturing.
Yep. That's not a good situation. Again, especially with people who believe that history progresses through a dialectic, and that, again, history marches towards an end you may not necessarily agree with, right? An end that requires the subordination of all things that exist. You know, again, communism figuring out how to subordinate the market to its purposes. Communism figuring out how to support the corporation to its purposes. Communism figuring out how to subordinate the means of cultural production to its purposes, right? It doesn't look like communism now, but that's because this is a transitionary stage. The goal is the same as it always has been. It's just, again, dialectically speaking, the thesis and the antithesis, right? The market and communism were synthesized, so they are held together in one principle simultaneously despite the contradiction, so that history can move forward through the process of synthesis until we finally hit the final synthetic resolution at the end of history, where all contradictions have been resolved, not by actually resolving the contradiction, but by simply holding contradiction as truth. But anyway.
China would be able to unilaterally decide who gets to be a modern country and who doesn't. Furthermore, they'd be the only country physically capable of developing AI. As such, irrespective of what any analyst or politician is telling you, we have no choice but to defend Taiwan from China, regardless of the danger or cost, up to and including full-scale nuclear war.
I would also say that this is a very good argument for starting semiconductor production in the United States, right? Preferably Texas, right? I'm just saying, preferably Texas and New Hampshire. But that being said, another thing that we we could probably do, encourage Japan to get a fucking real military back instead of the JSDF, right? Sure, the JSDF is functionally a military, but it's limited in ways that other militaries aren't, right? Give Japan the ability to potentially go to war to defend its allies, right? And then again, you could have an entire network of people, because China's been pissing off a lot of different groups, right? China has territorial disputes with Vietnam, with Japan, with obviously with Taiwan, right? But it has territorial disputes with the Philippines. It has territorial disputes with, well, not really territorial disputes, but it is encroaching on Russian territory, right? We do have the Chinese, basically trying to cultivate land in Siberia, which, by the way, Russia should really pay attention to, because that's how Mexico lost Texas, right? The Texians came in and actually cultivated the land and protected and, did work for the natives, and then ultimately the infrastructure was built by them. And so again, the natives sided with the Americans in the or sided with the Texians during the Texas War of Independence. That being said, not a direct comparison there, but the whole thing of, like, again, going in, cultivating the land without the being stopped by the local the local authority. It's how you lose that territory. So, and also again, Korea has a vested interest in all this too, right? Because again, you don't think that that's not necessarily going to pop off in a potential issue in Korea if they actually go to war with Taiwan. So, like, the entire region needs to be able to actually have arms and wage war. That's my opinion.
Truly be a battle for the future of the world, a war more justified and necessary than any in the history of our species. This is what World War III actually looks like. And Venezuela and Iran have been what we call shaping operations. Shaping operations are operations that you conduct to set the conditions for success for concurrent or follow-on missions. So whereas Venezuelan drug trafficking and nuclear proliferation in Iran are real and significant issues on their own, the grand strategy here is to deny China strategic partners and resources. Iran and Venezuela are both amongst China's most significant strategic partners. And China has long viewed Iran as a robust mechanism to conduct indirect warfare against the US throughout the Middle East. China's been providing both funding via oil imports. China receives 90% of all Iranian oil exports, as well as...
Okay, we're gonna go back just a little bit to read that. So Iran's oil exports by country. Iran exported 1.6 million barrels per day of crude oil and condensates in 2024. Much of Iran's oil trade operates via a shadow fleet which uses ship-to-ship transfer, reflagged vessels, and relabeled cargo. China, 90.8% share of Iran's crude oil and condensate exports. In 2010, Iran shipped oil to over 20 countries, including Japan, India, South Korea, and Italy. China's share of Iran's oil exports in 2010 was 19%. See, Syria, 3.3%, UAE, that's the United Arab Emirates, 2%, Venezuela, 1.2%, Iraq, 0.9%, Oman, 0.3%, Sri Lanka, 0.2%, Lebanon, 0.2%, Malaysia, 0.4%, Turkey, 0.6, with the new spelling, right, 0.6%.
Via oil imports, China receives 90% of all Iranian oil exports, as well as engaging in military and dual-use technology transfers that enhance both Iran's overt and covert military capabilities.
Okay, so we're going to go back to read that again. China has sent attack drones to Iran as it discusses ballistic missile cells. China is stepping up for Iran as U.S. strikes loom and warning U.S. Arab partners. Let's see. Chinese soldiers stand behind drones displayed during the Cambodian-Chinese Dragon Gold 2024 drill at a military police base in Kampong, Chnang province in Cambodia. I don't speak Khmer. on some month 2024.
China's intent for all of this is that Iran itself, or via its proxy terror and insurgent groups such as Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, degrades U.S. influence in the region, causes problems that prevent us from fully shifting our focus from the Middle East to China and Russia, and if military confrontation between the U.S. and China were to break out, that Iran would be on China's side and could cause serious problems in the Middle East that would have global consequences. Thus,
yeah. Again, a nuclear-armed Iran is a really, really bad situation. I mean, a non-nuclear armed Iran is already causing problems all over the fucking Middle East, and you know, who do you think is the main? Who do you think is one of the main funders of groups like Hezbollah, right? By the way, funny thing that people seem to forget: there's actually two Israels in the Middle East. Israel was founded as supposed to be like a Jewish state, right? As Palestine was supposed to be like the Arab state, bordering it, right? Well, Lebanon was supposed to be the homeland, not for the Jews or for the Arabs, but for the Christians in the Middle East, right? That's why the president of Lebanon, by law, has to be Catholic. Whereas, again, the prime minister of Lebanon has to be Muslim. Because it was an experiment to see whether or not Muslims and Christians could actually live in peace side by side together. Well, the answer is no. The answer is apparently not. Because Hezbollah is not the state of Lebanon, but Hezbollah, operates in Lebanon. They lob bombs into Israel. So the bombings of Lebanon by Israel are almost always, maybe you can find exceptions to this, I'm not fucking sure, but the reason that Israel bombs Lebanon is because they're not actually bombing Lebanon, they're bombing Hezbollah, and Hezbollah has the issue of, again, hiding in villains and potentially using human beings as shields, right? It's a messy situation. And again, Islam is the root of the problems in this entire region. It really is.
Opening up an additional theater in that war, which brings us to the Strait of Hormuz. Now, first things first, Iran does not control the Strait of Hormuz. They do not have a naval blockade that's only letting through the traffic they choose and are preventing all other traffic by force. To do this would take a significant naval presence, and Iran no longer has a navy. Instead, they're just simply holding the strait at jeopardy with missiles and mines. This works because commercial shipping vessels and their cargo are extremely expensive. So much so that they need a great deal of insurance to set sail.
Also, again, just setting up naval mines like this is, again, a violation of international law. Not that anyone seems to care about it when Iran violates international law, but, you know.
As such, the only thing you need to do to shut down a commercial shipping lane is make the
international law is fake and gay, by the way, but I'm just saying, if you're going to use the issue of international law, no one seems to care when, again, Iran violates international law. It seems kind of interesting, right? It doesn't seem to exist to apply equally across all parties. It only seems to exist to really cut one way.
Voyage risky enough that insurers are unwilling to underwrite it, at which point no shipping company can afford the risk of making the journey, and no ships will traverse that lane. So
yeah, and again, it's like we've seen recently that like Iran is attempting to have a situation where, again, which is why the American Navy moved in, that, like, again, only Iranian ships and those Iran decides have the, are in good standing to use the Strait of Hormuz, get to use the Strait of Hormuz, right? And only the United States seems to be the one willing to actually step in and say, no, you're not just going to bomb ships. Funny enough, this is what fucking started the Barbary Wars, wasn't it? It's like, fucking Muslims won't stop touching our boats.
It's extremely poor analysis to say that Iran has become stronger now that they know that they can hold the world hostage. They've always known they could do this. And
again, what makes you think they wouldn't hold the world hostage with nuclear weapons if they're already holding the world hostage with just regular missiles trying to control a strait that everyone needs to use? Right? This is not outlandish.
They've been developing sophisticated bottom mines for the last 43 years to do it. Bottom mines are called that because they sit on the seafloor and use magnetic, acoustic, and pressure sensors to determine when their target is overhead.
Okay, so we're going to go back and again read this. I know, they're probably a little annoying. Good, anyone watching me knows that I like to read all this stuff. So bottom influence mines, sensor activated. Rest on seabed. Advanced sensors detect on their influence. Acoustic detects ship engine sound. Magnetic detects hull's magnetic field. Pressure detects water displacement. rest on the seabed. Advanced sensors detect ship signatures, harder to detect and clearer than contact mines. Yeah, that makes sense.
At which point they detonate with much greater force than traditional sea mines and are capable of snapping the keel of large vessels. Because they sit on the seafloor, they're the hardest to detect and the hardest to clear. So Iran hasn't just known that they could do this, they've been preparing to do this since 1983. So to all the people who are freaking out now when this, at least so far, has been a relatively minor disruption, what do you think would happen if Iran, capable of holding NATO and the US at nuclear jeopardy, wanted to shut down the strait?
Exactly. Fucking again, basic counterfactuals. This is one of those issues where it's like, but I did have breakfast this morning, right? Oh my god.
We're going to roll up like we just did and sink their whole navy and destroy their whole air force if they have the ability to nuke us in response. So that really just leaves the one reaction. Give them whatever they're demanding. And soon the whole region descends into Bartertown from Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome, where Auntie, played by Tina Turner, ran Bartertown, and a genius dwarf riding around on a giant with Down syndrome, calling himself Master Blaster. Yeah, kids, the 80s was a wild time. Created the electricity for Bartertown via natural gas reclamation from pigs. So anytime there was a conflict between Auntie and Master Blaster, he would yell, "Embargo!" and turn off the power. He would make Auntie give in to all of his demands and then embarrass her by making her publicly declare that it was actually Master Blaster who runs Bartertown. And this is exactly what a nuclear Iran would do to the rest of the world. Anytime they didn't get their way, anytime they needed money, anytime they needed to distract from internal problems, or do so at China's behest, either to distract the US and NATO, or to degrade any adversarial nations, economies, or military capabilities.
And yes, they would absolutely do this. The entire thing with Islam is, again, one of the things that people don't really talk about is the dhimmi, right? The kafir. The subjugation of the kafir is a religious edict of Islam. This is the entire point of the jizya, right? This is the idea of the humiliation tax. You don't accept Islam, so you pay us this particular tax because you don't believe, or we'll kill you. Right, and then, yeah, the whole concept of jizya is the basis behind, again, the abuse of the welfare state in Western countries, right? It's like, why are they taking this? Well, it's like, oh, well, the entire idea behind Islam is that Islam will conquer the world, and as it's conquering the world, all the infidels that are conquered will be subjugated, humiliated, and forced to pay for the lifestyle of Muslims. Well, they can't win by force, but they can still make you pay your humiliation money through the welfare state. So, yeah, they would absolutely do this, right? They would absolutely try to hold the world hostage as an ego trip and like as a show of machismo force. It's like, oh yeah, we control the world through through our might. We are the only ones brave enough to actually hold the world hostage through this nuclear threat. It's a really bad time.
And the rest of the world would have to capitulate, learn to go without, or face potential nuclear annihilation. So this is one of the chief reasons Iran can never get nuclear weapons. Because even if you don't believe they would immediately engage in nuclear jihad, there is no reason to believe that they wouldn't engage in nuclear extortion based on their current behavior. Conversely, removing Venezuela, and depending on the long-term outcome of this war, Iran, from Chinese influence, means that not only are we preventing these nations from adversely impacting our allies' economies and supply chains, it means we're adversely impacting China's economy and supply chain.
I would like to point out that I also think the whole idea of like Iran doing the bidding of China if they have nukes, no, I think this would have backfired in China's face. I think this would have absolutely backfired. The thing with the Red-Green Alliance is it never works, because whenever they actually win, the factions break apart. The red will betray the green, or the green will betray the red, right? What happened in Iran after the fucking leftists helped the Islamists to actually overthrow the Shah? Well, the Islamists took power and then they killed all the leftists, right? So what happened in many of these communist countries when they took over? Well, they put the Muslims under heel, right? And they did it fucking hard, even if they didn't necessarily genocide the Muslims in their territory like the Islamists did the leftists. They still put them under very strict heel for a particular reason, right? So yeah, no, this would have also led to a conflict between China and Iran. Because it turns out China and Iran are both eschatological countries, right? They both have an idea of how the world is going to end and what the purpose of history is, and they have different goals for that purpose of history. So they're eventually going to come to blows on that.
And in time of war can hinder their access to energy and other critical industrial inputs. Before the U.S. incursions, Venezuela and Iran were selling sanctioned oil to China at a steep discount. Venezuela exported on average 500,000 barrels to China per day, and Iran exported on average 1.5 million barrels per day, which collectively accounted for 1/6 of all Chinese oil imports. Simply forcing China to pay fair market price for this oil, which we've already done with Venezuelan crude, will raise Chinese fuel prices by 15 to 20% permanently. And if Iranian oil ends up under U.S. influence the way that Venezuelan oil has, those oil exports could be shut off if China did something like invade Taiwan. And if China did go to war against the U.S., it's estimated they would need to import 4 to 5 million more barrels of oil per day than they already do. So on a war footing, and with 2 million barrels of imports turned off, this would raise China's oil deficit to between 6 and 7 million barrels per day, which
thereby making it too costly to actually pick the fight in the first place.
is 41% of total Chinese peacetime oil consumption. All of this oil would need to be taken from a combination of China's strategic stockpile, which is extensive, claimed to be 1.5 billion barrels, and then from non-military industry and domestic consumption to keep their war machine rolling. All in, this means that China would, at most, only be able to sustain large-scale combat operations against the U.S. for 214 days before starting to do serious socioeconomic harm to itself, and thus drastically increasing social, political, and economic instability throughout the nation.
I don't think it would. I think it would take longer than 214 days for China to actually take Taiwan. Just say it. The island is booby-trapped for this exact purpose. Also, all their military bases, like their large military bases, are on the opposite side of the mountain, so they have like a geographic shield. And it's called the island aircraft carrier for a reason, right?
Furthermore, China supplied Venezuela and Iran with several of the major weapon systems that were used in both conflicts. Weapon systems that spectacularly underperformed. Chief amongst those weapons are radar systems and air defense missiles. These weapon systems have only been able to effectively target our 4th-generation combat aircraft, such as the A-10 and the F-15E that were shot down, while our 5th-generation stealth aircraft like the F-35 have been able to operate with impunity. For reference, to date, more than 13,000 sorties, or aerial missions, have been flown by the U.S. against Iran, and only 26 aircraft have been lost to enemy fire in the air. And 24 of those 26 were Reaper drones. More than 13,000 chances to shoot down our aircraft, and they only hit 26.
Absolutely mogged, right? Just absolutely fucking mogged.
And those 26 were exclusively last-generation aircraft and drones. And on the subject of our last-generation aircraft, there's been some confusion in the press saying that because one of the aircraft shot down was an F-15E, that this proves that the Chinese air defense systems are advanced. This is most likely a case of the press confusing the F-15E with the F-15EX. The X designation identifies that these F-15Es were upgraded with our state-of-the-art electronic warfare suite, that amongst other things is very effective at jamming anti-aircraft missiles. So the F-15EX is a 4th-generation aircraft with 5th-generation electronic warfare capabilities, and because of this is often referred to as a 4.5 generation aircraft. Thus, the Chinese air defense artillery's ability to only strike our fully 4th generation aircraft does in fact mean that their ADA systems were born a full generation behind. And whereas the weapon systems that China sold Venezuela and Iran are their downgraded export versions, the fact that in the wake of these weapons' poor performance there have been both military leadership and academic researcher purges would suggest that the true capabilities of their top-tier domestic models are not enough past their export models that they feel good about their chances fighting the US. And it would appear that, taken all together, this has had a significant impact on China's strategic analysis, as the U.S. Office of the Director of National Intelligence has released their 2026 annual threat assessment, which asserts that while Beijing has not renounced the use of force, it's increasingly prioritizing non-kinetic gray zone tactics, economic coercion, and diplomatic pressure to compel unification with Taiwan without a full-scale invasion. So
unification would be a really, really stupid decision on Taiwan's part, to be perfectly honest. Okay, so let's read this. China, Taiwan. In 2026, Beijing probably will continue seeking to set the conditions for eventual unification with Taiwan short of conflict. China, despite its threat to use force to compel unification if necessary and to counter what it sees as a U.S. attempt to use Taiwan to undermine China's rise, prefers to achieve unification without the use of force if possible. The People's Liberation Army, PLA, also continues to develop military plans and capabilities for attempting to achieve unification using military force if directed to do so. Let's see. The PLA probably is making steady. By the way, if you want to know why China is so hard set on taking Taiwan, it's because if you actually think about it, Taiwan is the one that is the real inheritor of the Chinese culture, not the Chinese Communist Party, which set out originally to destroy the four olds to reset to year zero, right? How can you inherit that which you sought to intentionally destroy? And then even after you decided to go with the flow with socialism with Chinese characteristics project, you still again have to bastardize the entire thing, through the that synthesis. So if there was either of these two were a claim to like the actual heritage of China, it would be Taiwan. Also, again, the existence of Taiwan shows that the Chinese people don't actually need the Chinese Communist Party, because Chinese people actually exist on their own fairly well, it seems, without the Chinese Communist Party. That's why the unification thing is so big for them. But anyway, so the People's Liberation Army probably is making steady but uneven progress on capabilities that it would use in any attempt to seize Taiwan and deter, and if necessary, defeat U.S. military intervention. At times, it has increased the scope, size, and pace of operations around Taiwan. The IC, or intelligence community, assesses that Chinese leaders do not currently plan to execute an invasion of Taiwan in 2027, nor do they have a fixed timeline for achieving unification. However, China publicly insists that unification with Taiwan is required to achieve its goal of national rejuvenation by 2049. Again, the euphemism. I love how they put that in quotation marks, right? The 100th year anniversary of the founding of the People's Republic of China, Beijing almost certainly will consider a variety of factors in deciding whether and how to pursue military approaches to unification, including PLA readiness, the actions and politics of Taiwan, and whether or not the U.S. will militarily intervene on Taiwan's behalf. Chinese officials recognize that an amphibious invasion of Taiwan would be extremely challenging and carry a high risk of failure, especially in the event of U.S. intervention, which, by the way, would be a massive blow to the Chinese Communist Party image in China. A conflict between China and Taiwan may disrupt U.S. access to trade and semiconductor technology critical to the global economy. If the U.S. were to intervene, it probably would face significant but recoverable disruptions to its transportation sector from Chinese cyber attacks. Even without Washington's involvement, U.S. and global economic and security interests would face significant and costly consequences, with tech supply chains disrupted and investor fears across the markets. In addition, a protracted war with the U.S. risks unprecedented economic costs to the U.S., Chinese, and global economies. So there we go.
So China isn't giving up. They're still our leading global rival, and they still have every intention of absorbing Taiwan. But World War III has at least been postponed. And between a nuclear...
Thank God we don't have to deal with the consequences of, again, a nuclear-armed Iran, which, again, I think we were probably, unironically, at the end of the road that we could have kicked the can down. World War III, at least as it was threatened, doesn't seem to be on the horizon anymore, and hopefully it never will be again. But there's always opportunity for man to fuck up a good thing.
Iran and China invading Taiwan, 2027 was projected to be the most dangerous year since at least the end of the Cold War. But both of those threats have been averted, at least for now. I can't tell you how all of this is going to play out in the long run, and I know a lot of people are freaked out by a whole slew of dangerous stuff happening very quickly that they don't fully understand.
I do appreciate that he's talking in the sense of like counterfactuals, like, again, projections. things that are estimated based on information. So that's counterfactuals. And he has the humility to, like, again, say, I don't actually know how this is going to play out, right? Because, again, I also have a video, not just a 5-hour video, defending the idea that this could be a just war if things play out correctly. Because, again, like, if the action in war becomes unjust, that fucks up the whole program, right? And I have a stricter definition of just war than most just war theorists, because I add that third quality of just in leaving. So not just like, or just in end. So not just in cause or just in, war, but also just in end. So my theory of just war is actually stricter than most people. And even I'm like, okay, we actually could satisfy all three of these conditions. Could being the operative word. We can still fuck it up. I also have another 5-hour video on apocalypticism where I bring up that exact issue. It's like, it seems to me prima facie that from what I understand of the Iran war, that this is that the conflict itself is just. But, with dispensationalists and Chabadnik extremists, I could entirely see this becoming unjust because, again, bad actors come in and, again, make the means of war and the end of the war, or the purpose, right, malevolent in se, or malum se. So, malevolent in itself, basically.
But I'll tell you, as a guy whose life is still on the line to go deal with this stuff, based on how it's all shaken out so far, I feel much better about next year.
Again, this guy doesn't want to go to war, right? He doesn't want to go to war with China. He doesn't want to go fucking die in the Middle East for, like, for, to use the parlance of the, online sphere right now. He doesn't want to go to war to die for Israel, right? He doesn't want to have to go to war in South America to, like, deal with Venezuela, right? We have better things to do with our time than, like, unnecessarily go to war with each other. Kind of like, again, with World War I, where it's like everyone decided, yes, war, good thing, and then proceeded to commit the entire Christian world just decided to commit suicide by not listening to the Pope when he said, "Do not wage this war." But anyway, that's besides the point.
And I hope hearing me say that makes you feel a little bit better about next year too. But that's going to be it for me. So if you found this information useful, give me the old controlled pair on the like and subscribe buttons. And if you found this information useful enough that you want to buy me a beer about it, there's a link to my Patreon and Subscribe Star in the description. So until next time, this is James Merritt for Radiance Nation, reminding you to always be the master of your fate, the captain of your soul.
All right. So that was the Iran war prevented World War III twice. Now, I actually really like this analysis. I like that he, again, brings his citations to the conversation. Because his analysis basically is a more succinct argument from what I was making a while ago when all this actually popped off, right? And it is actually nice to see someone who actually, like, specializes in these areas come to, like, a similar conclusion, if not necessarily for the same reasons sometimes, right? Yeah, I actually really like this coverage. I think he makes a fairly persuasive case. Let's see, and he provides the citations here in the actual description too. So if you want to read these for yourself, all of these resources are down here. So yeah, I think I'm going to give Radiance Nation a subscribe because that was a really good video. So yeah, I largely agree with Readiness Nation in here. I think anyone who had seen my 5-hour Iran video would probably have told as he was talking that I'm probably going to agree with the majority of what he says as he's saying it, right? But yeah, one of the things that we do have to remember is that, like, well, our principles have to correspond with reality, first of all, right? And a lot of us like to live in the world where ethics is completely abstract and divorced from any kind of concrete reality, right? And one thing I keep pointing out to people is about the non-aggression principle, for example, right? Is that the non-aggression principle doesn't say that you have to wait to be shot before you can actually fire back, right? The whole thing is, like, you will not initiate force or coercion. But if someone else is initiating force or coercion, then you can respond in kind, right? It's the basics of self-defense. You don't have to wait for someone to actually pull out a knife and stab you if they tell you, they're gonna kill you, right? You can, in fact, hit first if they actually initiate that aggression first. Like if they signal that they're going to actually hurt you and it's a credible threat, that does satisfy, in my opinion. The only if it doesn't, the non-aggression principle doesn't mean anything, because because it's not really attached to anything in reality. But no, I think that the non-aggression principle, properly defined, would allow people to hit first in response to a clear and present threat, right? Doesn't necessarily have to be a verbally stated threat, because someone can tell you, I'm going to kill you, right? I'll give you an example. I did talk to a South African one time where, a white South African who told me a very interesting encounter with a Bantu South African who said something along the lines of, what was it? That you have to be kind to cattle before you slaughter it, right? Very clearly a veiled threat. And when people tell you this kind of stuff, you got to kind of pay attention to it, right? When people tell you that their plan is to kill you, you might want to pay attention to that. And in the case of like the personal, like if someone says that they're going to kill you, and you have a reason to believe that it's a real incredible threat, you have the right to defend your life and your liberty and your property, even with lethal force, whether the law, in my opinion, whether the law agrees with you or not, right? It's better to be judged by 12 than carried by 6, right? So, yeah. Long story short, a preemptive strike in the personal is still permissible under the non-aggression principle because, again, threat of force is something that you actually have to be able to address in the real, right? Coercion, the non-aggression principle is again about coercion and force. When do you initiate force or coercion? The non-aggression principle says, well, you don't start shit, but you end shit, right? Which is the way that we should be thinking about it. Don't start shit, but end it if it starts, right? So, anyway, I'm rambling on. It's definitely very late. I know this is like, I've been gone for a while. I've been actually involved in a project with some other creators, and hopefully we'll see how well this works, because if this works, then there'll be other projects in the pipeline. But hopefully I can get back to, because my part seems to be close to done for that project, at least in the heavier part. So hopefully I can return to reactions and playing video games, right? I do want to play Pragmata. It does look fun. I do have a video to record on Saturday. I might make it a stream. I'm not entirely sure about that, but we'll see, right? So y'all have a lovely day. I will see y'all later.